it comes down to there's no magic bullet. It's going to take a security mindset from the top down and the bottom up.
Today, right off the top of the program for this Overdrive Radio podcast episode for February 16th, 2025, a bit of a hypothetical that's, well, really not hypothetical at all, though we'll withhold the names pending multiple court cases on their way to resolution. But consider this scenario. You engage with a broker you feel you know is legitimate for a load of copper bound for the Northeast. You drop that load for $1,600, ultimately get paid, then go on about your business to the next one. Meanwhile, though, the same load is being rebooked by the same quote-unquote broker. Note the quote-unquote there. I think it's certainly safe to say at this point. The quote-unquote broker contracts with yet another owner to move that load further west to the center of the country, whereupon that owner drops the copper and goes along his own merry way. Yet again, the quote-unquote broker now has another operator in his sights for the third move of the copper, this time with a destination in the Los Angeles area. The owner-operator who picks this load up, though, promised a handsome rate, gets another indication of just where he's bound for along the way. Not a manufacturer who needs the copper for their products, rather the address for what looks to be the kind of place where old cars and trucks and scrap metal of various kinds are all sent to die. Salvage yard, in essence. This operator calls the cops, opening a case that then winds its way back to the origin of the manufactured copper in the rural southeast, where a rural detective IDs and then orders arrested the owner-operator that picked up the load to begin with, landing the driver in jail in his home region, where he spends several nights before being bonded out at $50,000. The original crooks, the quote-unquote broker on the load, likely impersonating a legitimate entity or otherwise part of a double brokering ring of authorized entities, gets to sit at his or her computer wherever he or she might be and keep up the good work. While this owner, last summer, and his carrier face scheduled court dates that come and go, ongoing discussion amongst defense and prosecution, all with no resolution. When I first heard about this particular case back late last summer, the arrest had just happened with a September court date scheduled, which was then pushed to October, and none of those court dates held, ultimately. Still, there's been no resolution as efforts to untangle the scheme continue. Two other drivers were similarly caught up in it and at least initially charged as well, according to sources familiar with the proceedings. The charges? Obtaining property by false pretenses in excess of $100,000 or more, just for falling for a fake broker's representation of himself as legitimate as he schemes with an unknown number of actually knowing accomplices to steal the copper. I'm Todd Dills, and today on the podcast, we've got a conversation Overdrive senior editor Matt Cole had with cargo theft security firm Overhaul's Danny Ramone about just what that company's seeing in the so-called strategic theft landscape around the nation. That's the kind of theft I described here at the top, often with multiple layers of deception and misrepresentation involved to unwittingly include entirely legitimate operations in their efforts to steal hot commodities.
Fraudulent or deceptive theft, right, is one of the things where we're seeing the most gains, the most sophistication, and the most targeting. So I think that's the one right now that's doing the most damage.
Deception and targeting have both gotten quite elaborate of late, too. Overhaul's most recent security alert to its client base as well as press members flagged not just broker ID theft, but new levels of sophistication in actual carrier impersonation, down to the very fleet trucks of established name-brand carriers. Quote, a criminal network operating in California is cloning the tractors of well-known, large, established carriers in attempts to gain entry to shipper locations and fraudulently obtain targeted cargo. Quote goes on, equipment that arrives at loading docks is thoroughly cloned, including the correct logos, colors, unit number structure, etc. Drivers who arrive also have information about scheduled trailer pickups, mixing traditional fictitious pickup strategies into the advanced cloning of carrier trucks. End quote. Overdrive executive editor Alex Lockey recently wrote about a new so-called fraud watch system from Overhaul getting in place with shippers to better verify carriers entering their premises and measuring and scoring them in different ways on various security protocol metrics that could at least help put a damper on this kind of theft. Likewise, some of the double brokering that occurs. In some ways, what shippers putting the overhaul system in place are doing resembles transportation attorney Hank Seaton's recommended supply chain protocol from a year or two back, including more robust guard shack checks and sign-offs to truly confirm carrier, broker, and driver identities. Find in the show notes a link to a past podcast featuring Seaton and the protocol. Likewise, Lockheed's reporting last week on Overhaul's Fraud Watch system. And keep tuned for, after the break, Cole's check-in with Overhaul Representative Danny Ramone about ways the entire freight supply chain can better work together to battle the problem of theft of all types, whether those strategic varieties or tried-and-true smash-and-grab trailer break-ins and full trailer thefts that still make up a majority of all cargo theft incidents. Here we go.
Cold weather is coming. Will your diesel engine be ready? Protect it with Howe's Diesel Treat, the nation's top anti-gel solution. Say goodbye to gelled fuel, water buildup, and harmful deposits while enjoying smooth lubrication. And if the temps drop way below freezing, don't panic. Howe's Diesel Lifeline can rescue gelled fuel with no fuel mixing or filter replacement needed. Both products are guaranteed and warranty safe. Don't let winter bring your engine to a halt. Trust Howe's to keep you moving through the coldest weather.
Find more information about the Howe's Company's full line of winter and summer formula fuel treatments at HOWESproducts.com. Here's Danny Ramone speaking to just how bad it's gotten when it comes to cargo theft in today's world.
The state of cargo theft right now is bad, to put a little bullet point on it. But if you want a little summary of what's been happening, I mean, we've been seeing increases on increases, right? Not just continued increase, but acceleration. We're hoping at this point that we may start to see a leveling off, but that leveling off is in no way due to like capacity constraints on the criminal side. It's just due to, very likely, we've reached a saturation of interested parties. Who are interested in getting organized around cargo theft, right? But we've seen increases on all metrics of cargo theft in the U.S. and Canada, whether it's, across a certain product type vertical, they've all seen increases. Whether it's in certain states, they've pretty much all seen increases. They may jockey for position when we're talking about percentage and share of thefts, but, outside of California being number one, but by and large, they've all seen increases in theft. And then when we talk about types of theft, how these thefts are performed, we're seeing massive increases in large-scale pilferage, which can include the entire contents of the trailer. Pilferage really just means taking the cargo out of the trailer rather than taking the trailer with it. And strategic theft or fraudulent pickup, what goes by several different names, but fraudulent or deceptive theft, right, is one of the things where we're seeing the most gains, the most sophistication, and the most targeting. So I think that's the one right now that's doing the most damage.
There has been a lot of talk the last couple of years about fraud leading to cargo theft. And while, obviously that's a huge deal, but the traditional style of theft of either stealing an entire truck and trailer or pilferage, like you were talking about, those are still the biggest. That's where most of the theft is still occurring, correct?
Yes, but by a smaller and smaller margin. Because the scalability of that type of theft is just not the same as it is with a fraudulent or deceptive type of theft where you're using technology, right? A straight theft, which is the traditional theft, where the entire tractor trailer or at least the trailer is stolen from the rightful driver whenever it's unattended, usually, is still seeing increases as well. But that type of theft, like I mentioned, it's going to take a team of people, usually 3 to 5 people, upwards of a week or more, especially if you're counting intelligence gathering on their end. It's going to take at least a week or more to capture one trailer, to steal one trailer of product. Whereas if you know what you're doing, if you've got a couple of, industry contacts on the bad actor side, you can steal dozens of loads in a day from behind the safety of a keyboard where no one's ever going to see you. You're never going to come into physical contact with a stolen product. And with the proliferation of e-commerce, you can drop ship that to an e-commerce warehouse where it just gets taken into inventory, shipped out as it's ordered, and you're collecting 100% of that profit. You didn't pay for that product. 100% of what you're charging and receiving is then profit margin. So early on, the industry widely referred to this genre of theft as fictitious pickup. And that's because when we first started to see this type of theft in the industry, and we're talking, 10, 12, 15 years ago. Fictitious pickup was what was being experienced by and large. And that's very much a social engineering type of theft where somebody has some inside information about, ABC Trucking is supposed to pick up this load at 4 o'clock on a Friday. Well, you know what? We're going to show up at 2 o'clock on Friday pretending to be ABC Trucking and saying, hey, we're just trying to get out of here before rush hour, help me out. And people would often help them out. And something like that would often gain them, ideally a weekend's worth of lead time. But, even if they only got a few hours worth of lead time, that was all they needed. Now, we've had to broaden the category to strategic theft or theft by deception, theft by fraud, because of the highly varied methods that they use. And they will switch and stack and mix and match these different MOs based on the target that they're pursuing, because they're intimately familiar with all of these logistics operations. They are familiar with the processes and procedures at the origins that they're targeting. They're familiar with the processes and procedures with the destinations, if the destination is going to be involved in their scheme. But some of those schemes can involve falsifying paperwork, the bill of lading, which ends up then being the proof of delivery. Technology has advanced to the point now where you can scan and edit a PDF on your phone, and then you send it to somebody, have it printed out, and you've got a new bill of lading for that truck. And producing a new bill of lading for a trailer full of goods is essentially laundering that freight, because you can mask the original origin, you can mask the intended destination, you can change piece counts and weights and seal numbers on there. So, maybe if a destination doesn't have processes in place to check digital BOLs or blockchain enabled BOLs from the shipper, they're going to take the piece of paper that the driver hands them, and that's gospel to them. If that piece of paper says there's supposed to be 2 pallets on this 53-foot trailer, that's standard practice in some parts of the supply chain, right? So they'll open up a 53-foot trailer and say, 2 pallets, cool, that's what we're supposed to see, and everything's fine as far as they're concerned, when that was actually supposed to be a full trailer with 20 plus, 40 plus pallets on there.
The FMCSA is, trying to revamp its registration system with an effort of stamping out fraud a little bit. From what you've seen so far, do you think those efforts are going to make any difference in the theft world?
It's absolutely going to make a difference in that, they're going to close some of the low-hanging fruit loopholes, as it is, for these criminals that these criminals are able to exploit. But what it's going to do, and by the time these measures are implemented, these criminals will have moved on to bigger and better tactics. They will have come up with more sophisticated schemes, but that does not mean that we should not take these steps that the FMCSA is going to take. These steps that they're going to take, hopefully including, transparency towards the private sector when we're looking to vet carriers. We need a lot more transparency into the data that the FMCSA has in order to be able to do that effectively. If they do that, if they're able to give us those tools, I think that could actually make a really big difference in the supply chain security landscape.
In this fraud landscape, is the type of commodity that's being hauled as important as it used to be? If I'm a carrier hauling certain things, does that matter as much as it used to?
It absolutely does, because these thieves are after certain products. But what doesn't matter the way it used to is exactly what products they're pursuing, because it's not necessarily about a cost-dense product the way it was 5-10 years ago. Now it's about what they can get it for. It's more about demand for that product. How quickly can they liquidate it? Because as I mentioned, it used to be if you were performing straight theft, stealing an entire 53-foot trailer of like product, chances are you're operating within a criminal network where one of the layers in that network is a fence. So that fence is then going to liquidate that entire load all at once, which when you do things like that, you're not getting anywhere near retail or even wholesale value for that as a thief, right? As a thief, you hope you can get maybe 10 or 15% if you're lucky. Now, if you look at the way things are going now, like I mentioned, with e-commerce sites and the ability to just ship overseas in bulk to legitimate buyers over there, buyers who think that they're buying legitimate goods, is increasing the profit margin. So all of a sudden, it's not necessarily how cost dense the product is, it's how in demand it is, how quickly it can be moved, because the thief is going to get a much higher margin for it. I mean, a great example of this is you look at 2020, when all of a sudden we had dozens of truckloads of paper towels and toilet paper being stolen. Not at all cost dense, but in demand.
What does Overhaul anticipate looking into to the next year here?
Yeah, we're hoping that the criminal networks that are already involved have kind of reached their capacity, right? Now, that doesn't mean that there's not more capacity for more criminals to get involved, and I believe that there is capacity for that, and I believe we're going to see that. How extensive it's going to be, how quickly it's going to happen, I don't know, but what I do know is that we're going to see an increase and a development in the sophistication, in the techniques that these criminals are using for theft by fraud and theft by deception. They're going to come up with new tactics. A lot of it, I have a feeling, is going to involve falsifying paperwork, forging paperwork, doctoring paperwork, because there's a lot of things that can be done around that that can throw people off the scent when you're investigating or when you're trying to prevent a theft.
Trucking companies, it seems like, especially with the falsifying paperwork, there's only so much they can do. You know, they get the paperwork to go pick up a load. If somebody shows up before them with false paperwork and takes the load, you know, the trucking company doesn't have anything to do with that. But what are some things they can do to try to mitigate their risk here?
Danny Ramon's answer to that question in some ways points to the limitations on trucking companies' ability to mitigate risks of fraud-enabled cargo theft themselves, other than keeping the fullest extent of awareness you can manage about you when you're working with brokers of any sort over the phone. Are they who they say they are? They appear to be on paper to be 100% legitimate. Brokerage authority active and with a long history, well-known name to you, and etc. Ask yourself just how sure you are that you're talking to an actual person that's with the company, not just impersonating them to gain access to a shipper's load. Otherwise, as Ramon suggests in what follows, owner-operators can get prepared for ID verification protocols themselves at shipper facilities and more vetting by both brokers and shippers. Load tracking, too. Wonderful, right? At the same time, when it comes to straight theft, as Ramon will go on to elaborate, there are certainly plenty ways to avoid it, starting with the old rule of thumb about not stopping for 250 miles after you leave a shipper's destination to increase the likelihood you won't be followed by the would-be cargo thieves.
There is no silver bullet. There's no one thing that's going to fix everybody's problem. I really wish there was. It'd make my job a lot easier, right? But it comes down to, you know, maintaining your carrier relationships, updating records, and making sure you've got a verified point of contact within each of those carriers. And then beyond that, really having a culture of security at the loading dock, making sure that everybody's being vetted properly when they come in. Is this the driver that we were supposed to receive? Is all the signage correct? Are there any red flags? Like, is the license plate zip tied onto the grill at chest height, indicating that maybe it's changed 3 or 4 times a day? Is that coupled also with a magnetic placard on the side of the tractor, indicating that also might be switched out 3 or 4 times a day? You know, look at the trailer. Does it look like it's had markings spray painted over and new markings put on top of it? Look and see if the bolts on the back of the trailer have been replaced with, or if the rivets have been replaced with nuts and bolts, because that means that they can open it without tampering with the seal. You know, there's all sorts of things you can look at, but it comes down to making sure you know you're giving your freight to who you think you're giving your freight to. Beyond that, the only thing that can help you is going to be real-time visibility. You need granular visibility into your supply chain to be able to identify patterns of theft, or patterns of behavior that indicate theft or fraud, while you still have the opportunity to recover it.
And as far as the truck drivers go, I know the rule of thumb kind of used to be, I think it was 250 miles from your pickup location. You know, try to make sure you can get at least that far out. Is that still considered best practice, or does it matter anymore?
I mean, a little from column A, a little from column B. It is absolutely still considered best practice. That is still, you know, when straight theft is practiced, it is most often practiced by being followed from origin until it stops and is left unattended. And if it doesn't happen within a certain amount of time, there's a fair chance those thieves are going to turn around and go back and try and find some more low-hanging fruit. That being said, situational awareness is key, because it differs where you are and what you're hauling. For example, coming out of California, you know, you hit 200 or 250 miles right as you cross a state line into Arizona. We've seen a massive explosion in thefts in Arizona, specifically for trucks that are leaving the LA basin, the Inland Empire area, because, you know, for several decades at this point, there's been a massive price difference between California and Arizona, which has caused the truck stops just across that border on the Arizona side to have some really fantastic amenities for truckers, which means it's a very desirable destination. Well, the thieves know this, right? So they're networked. What they're doing is they're setting up scouts at the origin sites who will identify targets, communicate the information about these targets to their accomplices who they have waiting, you know, in Lake Havasu or in Kingman, Arizona, where a lot of these high amenity truck stops are, and they're going to pick up the trail there. That, in effect, almost creates a new red zone starting at the California Arizona border. Operationally, we can't realistically ask people to not stop from LA until they get to New Mexico. And even if we did, considering the way these thefts are happening, that would only move the hotspot to New Mexico. Eventually, right? We're kicking the can at this point. So really, it comes down to there's no magic bullet. It's going to take a security mindset from the top down and the bottom up to make sure that your freight is secure, coupled with all the layers that you can afford to install on your supply chain. Topmost being visibility, so the location, the condition, the whereabouts of your cargo at any given time.
As noted at the top, read more about Overhaul's new vetting and security system being implemented at some shippers. Likewise, the supply chain protocol of transportation attorney Hank Seaton via links you'll find in the show notes. Big thanks to Matt Cole here for his work, and here's a big thanks to you for listening. Safe to say we'll hear much more about the subject of cargo theft moving ahead. Stay safe, everybody. Overdrive Radio is a production of Overdrive, the voice of the American trucker. It's edited and produced by me, Todd Dills, with the acoustic guitar and other support of trucker-songwriter Long Haul Paul Marhofer. The theme is Legend of the Snake Man by Marhofer, featuring the guitar work of Travis, the Snake Man himself, Whammock, Terry Tussock's version on bass, keys by Tishomingo Jim Whitehead, and on drums, Andrew Marshall. The podcast is backed up further by Overdrive's own social media coordinator, Jasmine Campbell, senior editor, Matt Cole, executive editor, Alex Lockie, and video editors, Lawson Russell and Andrew Glenn. See you next time.